Hello, everyone. I will maybe give like 30 seconds for folks to join, and then we will get started here. All right. Without further ado, let's get going. All right. So my name is Jessica Diaz, and I am the events manager in the Center for Partnerships and Innovation here at the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners, also known as NARUC. And it is my pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar on GIS applications for coordinating transmission siting and highway rights of way. Before we get started with the content of the webinar, I want to take just a couple minutes to give some background on NARUC as well as the Center for Partnerships and Innovation for anyone who's joining today who may not be super familiar with us, since this is an open webinar. So since 1889, NARUC has represented state public service commissions across the US and all the territories, all working to regulate essential services like energy, water, telecommunications, transportation, and power, all with the public interest in mind. And then the Center for Partnerships and Innovation, which is where I work and where this innovation webinar comes out of, is a big part of NARUC. The Center for Partnerships and Innovation, or CPI, builds relationships, develops resources, and delivers trainings to help state commissions navigate today's complex and rapidly evolving energy landscape. The webinar today is an example of a piece of work that comes out of CPI and a resource that we provide for our members. The Center for Partnerships and Innovation is funded through partnerships with the U.S. Department of Energy and the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and we just want to take a moment to thank them for their support. Here is a quick list of some upcoming virtual as well as in-person events coming out of the Center for Partnerships and Innovation. I think the only thing I will call out is actually a non-CPI specific event, which is the overall NARUC Winter Policy Summit that is coming up next month, February 8th through 11th in Washington, D.C. I believe registration is still open for that, and CPI will be putting on 2 workshops during that Winter Policy Summit. One is on wildfires, and we will also be doing an EV workshop as well. We have a couple site visits, one to a Google data center and one to a local substation. So if any of that interests you, I encourage you to register for the Winter Policy Summit, and I'll drop a link to the full list of all these events where you can register for anything that piques your interest in a moment. All right, without further ado, I am going to hand things over to my colleague, Deborah Reynolds, who is a senior regulatory policy specialist here in the Center for Partnerships and Innovation, and will also be serving as today's moderator for this webinar. So Deborah, you can feel free to take it away.
Thank you so much, Jessica. That was a great overview of all the work that we do. So again, welcome to everyone. Thank you for joining this innovation webinar. We're going to be talking about GIS applications for coordinating transmission siting and highway rights-of-way. As you all likely know, the demand for reliable electricity continues to grow, and expanding transmission infrastructure has become both more urgent and more complex. There are multiple executive orders and actions from the Department of Energy, like the Speed to Power initiative, that highlight these conditions. NARUC also runs a members-only transmission state working group. And while that is not open to everyone, in that group, we have certainly discussed the need for more ways to site transmission. We're excited about this today because transportation corridors, such as highways, railways, and other rights of way, can offer a promising opportunity to site new transmission and minimize land impacts, community disruption, and permitting challenges. So today, you're actually going to hear from 3 organizations. First, Rebecca O'Neill from the Pacific Northwest National Lab is going to share an overview of the regulatory and policy landscape surrounding this issue. That's going to be followed by a specific example of the challenges and opportunities in this area from Jessica O of the Minnesota Department of Transportation, also known as MnDOT. And finally, a demonstration from the RAY. The RAY is a national nonprofit based in Georgia, and they are going to share with us their GIS application that evaluates the suitability of accommodating buried and overhead transmission in the highway right-of-way and produces optimal path modeling for specific proposals. We are going to hear both from Allie Kelly, who is the executive director of the RAY, and from Jesse Hong Dwyer, who is their GIS expert during that portion of the webinar. And we are really grateful to everyone who is here to share this information with us. So now I'm going to provide a specific introduction for Rebecca O'Neill. And she will be our first speaker, as I mentioned. So Rebecca O'Neill leads and oversees the research programs at the Pacific Northwest National Lab. And that group, the programs that she oversees advance electric transmission planning, state energy security, utility wildfire mitigation, and resilience technologies. So you can call her for all sorts of things. And she has a focus on landscape scale challenges. And transmission is certainly a landscape scale challenge. Since joining PNNL in 2015, she's held leadership roles supporting the U.S. Department of Energy, including developing a hydropower grid research program and leading regulatory efforts for energy storage. Before she came to PNNL, she served at the Oregon Department of Energy and at the Energy Trust of Oregon, managing major renewable energy efficiency and federal grant programs, and she is a recognized expert in hydropower regulation and environmental impacts. We are so glad to have her with us today. Rebecca, take it away.
Thank you, Deborah. I'm going to go ahead and put a link in the chat for the website because what I'll be covering today, a lot of the details are on the website in the form of spreadsheets and case studies and other materials. So if you want a reference guide as we're going through, please take a look at that. You'll also notice that PNNL is partnered here with the Volpe Center, which is the research laboratory of the Department of Transportation. So my colleagues at the Volpe Center were pretty integral to this project. And one of the things that we discovered almost immediately is that PNNL came from the energy side, our Department of Transportation colleagues came from the transportation side, and it took us a long time to even really understand each other well enough to execute the project. So I guess we have sort of a microcosm just in this work and this research project of the work it takes to combine transportation and transmission expertise to execute work. So what I'll be talking about with you guys today is a little bit of the homework that we did through the joint office between the Department of Transportation and the Department of Energy. They funded our labs to cooperate and develop a gaps analysis. And so what I can share with you today are the landscape, sort of the factual landscape of the world that we're in on this topic, and then give you guys some hints about how to think about the gaps ahead. And then hopefully soon we'll have a resource for all of you how to analyze those gaps and what opportunities can come from that. Could you advance the slide for me, please? So the gaps that we discovered, but also the opportunity spaces. Yes, the policy landscape and the planning landscape, which I'll focus on mostly for today. But also, of course, there are a lot of other questions that come up in kind of the fundamental engineering, the siting and permitting, how to sequence different types of permits in order to make the process make sense, because every state has its own transmission siting process and its own Department of Transportation that's managing the right-of-way. The financial structures, you'll see this reflected in some of the planning conversation that we'll breeze through, but because the financial structures are so different, there are different motivations and even regulations about what kind of proponent can build what kind of thing in what kind of space. So those are some of the, I don't know if they're barriers so much as it takes work to sort of clarify all of those pieces so that this process can occur of developing transmission and transportation rights of way. I'll also touch for a little bit on rail. I think my partners are going to also, at the Ray, are also going to talk about rail. So next slide, thank you. On the website that I mentioned, these are kind of the constituent parts and the research that we had to do to understand the landscape. So these appendices are case studies that were written by Volpe. They are examples of projects that have been developed just in the last 20 years in the right-of-way. We wanted folks to have access to utility accommodation policies by state. And what you might notice is a trend in all of these appendices that almost all of this is state level information. And the state information is very, very variable. It's not easy to summarize or categorize. So we ended up putting them in these kind of big data appendices to help us make sense of what are the jurisdictional thresholds, what kinds of permits are required, how does the DOT treat this kind of development on its face. And so a lot of this work is at the either industry level or at the state level in order to make sense of it. So it's really important to you guys as states to look at the information that's appropriate for you. And your starting point, every state is going to be at a different starting point for this conversation. Next slide, please. So one of the data appendices has to do with authorities by state. These are some quick maps about CPCNs, which, as you guys know, on the energy side, a CPCN can be the kind of hub of a regulatory action for transmission siting, and it can be operated out of the Utility Commission. Other states choose to have independent siting boards, of which the commission might be a member. And then there also might be a totally decentralized process, meaning there is no central state or localized authority. The developer simply has to go through and get approvals from everyone who has any kind of oversight or jurisdiction. We brought these maps together mostly to illustrate just how differentiated it is. We also noted that the jurisdiction might depend on the voltage and that those voltage levels can really be all over the place. And when I say all over the place, I mean sometimes they're connected to typical engineering standards and sometimes they're not. Next slide. The other major feature of this conversation is the utility accommodation policies. So this is where the Department of Transportation articulates even the possibility of development within the right-of-way for non-freeway and freeway access. I'm going to let my colleague Jessica talk a little bit more about some of this in detail, or the Ray, but these policies, I think by and large, are really the place to start for the Departments of Transportation to even decide whether or not or under what conditions utility development is even permitted. If you go to the next slide, please, Jessica. This is another one of the appendix, I think, appendices that's available on the website. Thanks to crowdsourcing, we get updates. Allie and her folks at the Ray have helped us make sure that these stay current, but try to provide perspective on when are certain types of developments allowed. And it depends on freeway versus non-freeway. And of course, I think in the next presentation, you'll see sometimes we're not talking about crossing a right-of-way. We're actually talking about within the right-of-way and longitudinally connected to the right-of-way. There's also a development strategy that puts it just outside of the right-of-way, which we're aware of as well. So all of these things are sort of on the table for the gaps analysis, but for the utility accommodation policy, usually this explicit kind of development, longitudinal in the right-of-way, can be explicitly prohibited by the state out of the gate. So that's one thing. That's the first place to look into is what does your state even permit in the beginning? Next slide, please. Many states have actually started to enact legislation to clarify their interest in transmission development. The most mature state is Wisconsin. They've had a program on the books for over 20 years. But even last year, Colorado initiated and passed legislation on this topic. All of these are linked, and actually every state is provided in one of the appendices, sorry, the plural is difficult there. But what you'll, of course, notice is that the policy action actually helps coordinate states between the utility regulation or the development regulator and the transportation entity to help clarify that there needs to be a partnership there and some discussion about how those things can cooperate. So we do see state legislatures weighing in on that. And there are other bills that did not pass in this last section, but it doesn't mean they won't in the future ones. So I encourage you guys to take a look. And of course, if you have any updates to that, to those spreadsheets, we would really appreciate it. One thing that comes up a lot, if you go to the next slide, please, Jessica, is whether or not we can plan these things together. Transportation and transmission. Why can't we just think about them and build them at the same time? And what we learned really fast as we started to map all of this out is that that's a really tough thing to do. And there are a lot of reasons for that. But and this one is starting to articulate, who makes the decision over what footprint, and also that rights of way can be developed with future plans in mind is one thing that we learned. And so even if they're not planned at the same moment, even if they appear to be open, there might be a lot going on in that space or anticipated to be developed in that space. And it's really hard to sync up. It's very difficult to sync up with transmission development. If you'll scroll down 3 more slides, I think, please. There's the funding piece, there's the footprint piece, and if you could just go one more, please. I would say the big one is there's a process, a long-range planning process in transportation that would be the ideal time to say, this is when we want to build what exactly. But of course, as you all know, as part of the energy world, usually it's not that precise until right before people are ready to go. And even then, there's a lot of micrositing that happens within a development process. So when it's ideal, when it's designed to be in the transportation process as a key input is 20 years out. And of course, on the power side, that's very difficult to make a realistic assessment about 20-year out development with a strong commitment. So some of this is what needs to get worked through by the planning entities, not just the development entities. If we go to the next slide, just to touch on rail for a moment. There's a lot to say about rail, but it's really fundamentally different than working with the departments of transportation. One of the common places to look is at the Class 1 freight railroads. These are large entities. They already have pretty robust processes for accommodating utilities and other kind of resource sharing or other private sector uses of their right-of-way. But there are other smaller short lines that may also be more agile and more capable of flexing for different needs. One of the things that we notice about rail in particular is that they might have some really unique access to denser areas where transmission might otherwise be difficult to site. So I know folks tend to think about the big long lines, but also rail lines have access to urban areas that other places, other types of larger scale freeways and others might not have as readily available. If you go to the next slide, please. One of the things that we noticed pretty fast is that there's opportunity everywhere when it comes to rail. Rail crisscrosses this country. And here you'll see the Class 1 is in blue. As I mentioned, those are dominated by 6 companies. But there's also quite a lot of miles of track in every NERC region in this country. Some of the features they care about have to do with interactions with the railroad. These can actually be addressed, but there has been some history there that makes them very cautious about those kinds of interactions. So that's something to work out on the science and research side. And then also kind of making sure that there's safety clearances for everything that's going on. Usually with something as sophisticated as transmission, those are kind of technical details are easier to address because they're very clear and they're also heavily regulated. So everyone sort of knows how these things get developed at that level, but there's still a lot to work out to make this a smooth process. And of course, it's governed by railroad companies who have their own practices. So we do have an index of all of those utility accommodation policies provided on one of the appendices online. So as much as I've painted a difficult picture, if you go to the next slide, please, I want to let you know that people are developing in these spaces and it is working. So we provided a list of projects that have been developed on the website, but also we've provided case studies on some really recent development strategies that have successfully navigated the use of right-of-ways. and to their benefit. So if you wanted to learn more about specific developments that have managed to work through this process, that's all available on the website. And then the last slide I might offer you is that through the gaps analysis, we didn't just admire the problem, as we like to say at PNNL. We didn't just say, here are all the attributes of why this is hard. We started to think about what could make the process easier. Where have we sort of made cost assumptions that are providing a negative incentive somewhere upstream in a process that don't let us look at this opportunity realistically? How do the state policies start to create questions that research can answer? And so while this is preliminary, these are the kinds of things that we've been thinking about, and certainly welcome some feedback on how can research support or collaborations, focused collaborations support this end goal. So with that, I'm finished with my overview. If you go to, I think it's the next slide, I offer a thank you for your time and attention, and look forward to the questions and learning from my colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. That was wonderful. So much information to think about. I invite everyone to send her your questions and ideas for new research. So next, we are going to hear from Jessica O. from the Minnesota Department of Transportation, or MnDOT. She is the Deputy Office Director in the Office of Sustainability and Public Health. She facilitates public-private partnerships, pilots, and new initiatives supporting uses of transportation rights-of-way that support decarbonization, economic development, and quality of life. And she's going to walk us through what they've been doing in Minnesota. Thank you so much for being here, Jessica, and you can take it away.
Thanks so much, Deborah. Next slide, please. I realize this is a Jessica-rich environment, so if we say Jessica multiple times, there are 3 Jessicas involved technically in this call. What an embarrassment of riches. Well, it's such a pleasure to be here today. My name is Jessica O, and I'm part of the Minnesota Department of Transportation. We've had the pleasure for the past, 6 years or so in partnering with national thought leaders and our sister agencies in state government to dig into this topic. And we were able to kind of put together an initiative to ask some of the more detailed questions, to go on a learning journey of, what is to be gained, really, what are those technical, regulatory, and economic benefits of what would be the benefit of opening up transportation highway rights of way to hosting more transmission infrastructure, building relationships. And really, quite honestly, it took us years to even start to understand each other's, business model, our timelines, our planning horizons, our language, many of those, who are the players, what is the need in our state? All of those were critical activities over the course of the last 5 or 6 years. We had a pretty significant effort where we looked at risk, we asked the hard questions and dove in. So we're very excited that some of the results of that partnership with the Ray and many other thought leaders nationally were able to lead us to kind of where we are today. Next slide. So as we started to dig into this topic, I think that there are so many different ways to conceptualize really, what's at stake for which party. And from MnDOT's perspective, as we started to really dig in and understand, because for our agency, we did not have a great depth of understanding of the needs of the grid. So energy lives in their world, speaks your own language, transportation's in our own world, has our own asset condition and timeline and planning horizons. We didn't understand each other's language. There wasn't a lot of trust, and we didn't understand each other very well. So what we needed to do was to understand those grid needs. We needed to understand really how does that really connect to transportation. And I really believe, it might sound a bit trite, but I really believe that in the future, transportation and energy's fates are intertwined as we contemplate that decarbonized future, that electrified future. And breaking down silos and building relationships is a great way to understand that, of how can we support achieving objectives that serve the interests of both industries. So in Minnesota, we have a pretty robust carbon reduction strategy, and electrification of transportation is a key component of that, a really core part of our strategy. And we have really come to understand through this effort that, in order for those objectives to be achieved, there needs to be investment. And we had to kind of go from the process from scratch around really the generation and the transmission and all those various pieces to understand that there were needs there. We have some fires that have been lit in our state, in that our legislature passed a law in 2023 that indicated that all electricity must come from renewable sources by 2040. So a fairly aggressive decarbonization strategy. And MnDOT wanted to take a step back and ask, what role can we play? We care about decarbonization all across the board. And what we've come to really understand is that there are very strong benefits to our state and our grid in order to support energy decarbonization and renewable energy adoption more broadly, but also really the power and the grid that will be needed to support electrification into the future. So we have skin in the game. Next slide. So from this effort, we've been able to really kind of dig in and really understand the connected dots, and have seen from industry and from our utilities and renewable energy developers that this is a tool that the industry would like to have, a tool in the toolbox. And as we really dug in, the easy part for transportation agencies, for DOTs, is that we have well-established utility accommodation for crossings. And we have quite a bit of precedent and experience around what we call paralleling, which is when those poles or towers are just outside of the right-of-way line, but with significant aerial encroachment within MnDOT's right-of-way, that those projects require extensive approvals, permitting, and planning as well. So those projects wonderfully reduce the footprint and impact of the overall project, but they still require a lot of considerations on the part of a DOT. And then finally, there's this more deeper partnership that is the co-location, where actual poles and towers and whatnot, the infrastructure is located within our rights-of-way. And the preference is that infrastructure is as far to the edge of the right-of-way line as possible, which is where DOTs often accommodate utilities, as far away from the traveling public as possible. Next slide. So I think it's important to understand that, we're here to talk about what's possible, and often we don't understand each other's constraints. And so we have often, go back one a little bit. Often when you see the average rural stretch of a state or US highway, you often see what people view as underutilized land. Next slide. But in reality, there are many, many ways that what appears to just be grass is actually being utilized, whether that's existing utility accommodation for buried. Whoop, looks like it's automating for some strange reason. We are using, significant engineered soils to move water from the waterway. And so the ditch and all those various pieces are component that are a critical part of water and erosion control and habitat and snow storage and all these various areas. Oops, looks like it's some kind of weird automation is happening. That's okay. But in general, there are many, many uses, and we can accommodate transmission with utility accommodation, but there are constraints. So through this process, we can go on to that next slide. I'm sorry, there's something funky happening there. What we learned from our deep dive, it was that we needed to educate and have a deeper conversation with our energy partners around our vision of our use of our rights away. And the pressure points, are significant, but we can mitigate some of these pressure points the same way that many other siting options have mitigation options. So for us, the issues are around, the safety of the traveling public and our care for what happens when errant vehicles depart from the roadway. How do we make sure that those poles are safe and that, out of the way of the traveling public? We really want to understand how can these lines, how do they impact our workers working safely around transmission lines? We worry about who will pay. So if a transmission line is in our rights of way, who does all the additional grounding of our intelligent transportation infrastructure to make sure that there aren't induced voltage issues? What happens if there are extensive utilities already in the ground or state fiber that need to be relocated? Who pays for that? How do we accommodate that is an important consideration for the average DOT. And then we also think about those sort of relocation questions of, for most utilities, utilities. Many DOTs, if we indicate that a utility needs to relocate off of our right of way, that the utility pays, or we have a very well-established process to say this configuration of this road needs to be expanded and changed. Therefore, we need to move utilities. So it gets a little more complicated, as you all know, when you're talking about a $3 or $4 billion transmission line. Relocation of a project is very serious. So we have to think through those potential relocation questions in advance. And then environmentally, there's a huge basket of different types of issues that, communities and their view of scenic view sheds and scenic byways, of the environmental impacts. We have threatened and endangered species, we have contaminated materials, we have historic and cultural resources that could be buried in our rights of way that could be impacted. And then the average project also requires some pretty significant vegetation removal, which is just a normal part of projects, but can lead to a lot of heartburn. So those are the considerations for us as we contemplate hosting this infrastructure. Next slide. So our MnDOT has had the pleasure in the last 6 years, as we've dug into this topic, to work with the RAE on extensive reports and listening sessions and training sessions and all kinds of other ways for us to contemplate this. And AASHTO, which is a National Association of State Highway and Transportation Professionals, has also kind of established what was called a moonshot. And there's a couple big research papers on this. One of this was really around clean energy. And MnDOT was Minnesota had the pleasure of kind of using this opportunity to dig in, to share with other states our journey of learning about what the pressure points are, and honestly, what are the pressing needs for our nation, for our grid, and why we can be part of the solution and have this be a tool in the toolbox for those that need to site transmission. So as part of this, we have dug in deep of creating new resources to support early coordination. We've done more safety analysis. We are setting up kind of joint training. We want to get ahead and upstream of these projects by doing training with our Public Utility Commission, with our Department of Commerce State Energy Office, and our utility permitting section, to better make sure that we understand each other's constraints and that we have a clear process with good communication. We have had the law change in Minnesota in the last 2 years. We also have had a new law that said that this infrastructure can be hosted in any highway type as long as it is deemed safe and doesn't interfere with the transportation system. So that's a policy change that we've gone through, and we need to make sure everybody's on the same page. So we've invested in that while helping build the tools that will support those early coordination and early efforts with our partners like the RAE, who's going to share their tool. So next slide. So this is just a quick slide to advise you that we have a lot of resources on this. We have project guidance, and I'm going to drop into the chat as well another link to this page that has resources for those of you that might be interested in talking to your DOTs, how we've approached early notification memos and constructability reports and things of that nature, and guidance. Next slide. So just a couple quick wrap-up slides here. As part of this effort, it's really been meaningful to our agency to have national thought leaders and our sister agencies kind of come together to bring expertise and capacity and analysis that we don't often have the capacity to do, to contemplate, policy change without pulling those levers ourselves. So it really meant a lot to us to dig into this problem from different angles with different industries and partners. And this exercise has been about building trust, and we've created many different ways to do that. Some of those ways that I recommend if you want to dig into this are around sort of joint study sessions, peer exchange, listening sessions. All of these are ways that we wanted to make sure that we were hearing from all voices, and our executive level engagement really made a difference within that and resulted in new sort of understanding. And we've had the law changed, and we've created all these new resources that really help us navigate these waters more effectively. So we have some lessons learned, and we really are implementing those at this time. Next slide, and I think last slide. So I'm excited to pass it on to my colleagues with the RAE as we've contemplated this next chapter. As part of the last 5 years, we identified a need to dig into the data to understand transportation, data sets and constraints with other land use data sets in order to move this ball forward. As part of that, we've worked with the governor's office and others to activate multiple state agencies to kind of dig in to say, what is the use case here? How can we use GIS data to understand what possible siting could look like when it's transportation rights away, when it's MnDOT's right away? So our agency plus the PUC plus our Department of Commerce, our Department of Natural Resources, which also has large energy permitting functions and downstream permitting impacts, has come together with our enterprise-wide geospatial folks to help analyze the wonderful tool that has been built by the Ray. So we're excited to move into that next chapter and see that these are structures that help us understand issues that cross many state agencies and have a lot of stake for our economy going forward. So with that, I will pass it back to Deborah. Thank you for inviting me today.
Thank you so much, Jessica O. You've really laid out a lovely introduction to what the Ray is going to talk about next. So thank you so much. I want to introduce Allie Kelly. She's the executive director of the Ray, and working with the Georgia DOT and the Federal Highways Administration. She's guided more than a dozen projects from concept to construction on the Ray Highway, which is on Interstate 85 in Georgia. This nonprofit organization is now working with more than 25 transportation agencies, sharing expertise and technical assistance to deploy and scale projects and advance transportation infrastructure across the country. Allie is joined by Jessie Hong Dwyer, and she is the Director of Geospatial Solutions for the Ray and serves as the organization's principal geospatial advisor and technical lead. She also led the development of the proprietary right-of-way GIS analysis tools in collaboration with Esri, and that is a GIS software company, in case you don't know, advancing a scalable, data-driven approach to identifying suitable land for utility and energy infrastructure within the right-of-way. She previously served as a tenured professor of geography, where she led extensive GIS and geography research, resulting in dozens of peer-reviewed publications and conference presentations. We are so glad to welcome her today and so glad she could join Allie as part of this next presentation. And so I will turn it over to Allie. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Deborah. And let me start by saying what an honor it is for the Ray to participate in this webinar with our partners at NARUC, MnDOT, PNNL, and many of our state DOT partners are participants today. So thank you so much for making the time. Next slide, please. As Deborah said, I'm Allie Kelly. I'm Executive Director of the Ray. Deborah also mentioned what is now known as the Ray Highway. This is a corridor of Interstate 85 in West rural Georgia, which we have had the unique and extraordinary opportunity to collaborate with GDOT and Federal Highways to develop projects in order to develop the corridor into what is now the nation's premier proving ground for infrastructure innovation in the transportation space. We had this unique opportunity because the state of Georgia designated this 18-mile corridor of interstate as a memorial highway, honoring corporate and industrial pioneer Ray Anderson. So over 10 years of experience on this corridor, more than a dozen projects developed, and the proving ground now scaling and helping to support the sharing of expertise through this experience with state DOTs, tollways, turnpikes, railroad owner operators, and even a couple of seaports and airports across the country. Next slide. This is a demonstration of a visual demonstration of where we operate across the country. This map is constantly changing. We're in the process of signing partnership agreements in Montana, Utah, and Arkansas. But you can see that the Ray is working with transportation agencies across modes and across all regions of the country. And we also have a long history of partnering with federal agencies. Last year, we successfully closed the Thriving Communities program with USDOT as the lead agency for one of their cohorts. And then we're also currently involved in a Department of Energy funded initiative with the National Lab of the Rockies. Next slide, please. I would say from the very beginning of our organization's work, we have been involved in project development on the right-of-way specific to energy infrastructure and the development of energy resources. And this slide is just meant to give you a snapshot of where we are in 2026 and coming off of 2025. It's been extremely gratifying to have worked in this space for a decade, to see a number of national and federal entities moving into this work alongside us. I mentioned our work with the National Lab of the Rockies, but also the National Academies, the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation. You've already seen the great work of Rebecca and her team at PNNL. And notably, the National Governors Association is also standing up an effort around transmission siting and rights of ways in particular. Also, just want to mention that we expect an announcement sometime this year from USDOT around these corridors of commerce and programmatic opportunities to continue scaling right-of-way co-location nationally. Next slide, please. I'm moving fast because I want to try to give Jessie as much of our time so that she can demo both the overhead and the buried transmission tool. So we'll spend just a second talking about what brings state DOTs to the table. Rule number one of presenting is to know your audience. And this is a NARUC and an energy sector audience. So along with all the information that Jessica O at MnDOT has provided, let me just hit a couple of high points. I think that there is interest across state DOTs in supporting the energy infrastructure critical to global competitiveness, particularly for AI, and also to support economic development locally and in each state DOT state. But there are also some practical value streams that state DOTs can capture from participating in co-location in partnership with energy and transmission developers, as well as their sister and brother agencies. Among those include the opportunity to reduce maintenance and energy costs for the department itself, and also the opportunity to capture fees for that co-location or accommodation of transmission in the right-of-way. State departments of transportation are resource starved, and they would love to diversify the funding streams for their critical construction and maintenance obligations, and in some states, deferred pipelines of construction and maintenance. Next slide, please. So we're going to transition now into a demo of two unique GIS tools that our nonprofit organization holds and operates both for our public sector agency partners as well as for partners in the private sector, which do include a collection of utilities and transmission developers. Next slide. Just a note to identify the right-of-way beyond the beautiful photo that Jessica O shared from MnDOT. Here's an aerial of a diamond interchange, and you can see that the right-of-way areas include the diamond areas or the gore areas, but also include those long linear land areas alongside the paved area. An important piece of data that the Ray has recently finished developing to fill one of those data gaps that Rebecca mentioned, we have validated and now hold a digitized data set for the rights of ways for the entire national highway system. We also hold the right-of-way data for approximately half of the country's Class 1 railroad system. And that data is critical and integral to using these tools to assess the suitability of the right-of-way and the feasibility of the right-of-way for hosting overhead and or buried transmission lines. So with that, Jessie, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Allie. And Deborah, feel free to stop me so that we can have enough time for Q&A. I will do my best to go quickly. I'm so honored to be here to be able to introduce our right-of-way transmission deployment tool with everyone. So our right-of-way transmission deployment tool considers various infrastructure and environmental data as a criteria, such as railroad pipelines, water features, and urban areas. And our tool assigns different weights depending on how critical each criterion is when we determine transmission line siting. And we receive these default values from subject matter experts like transmission engineers and developers. But the weights can be adjustable based on DOTs and clients' recommendations. Additionally, our tool can also consider various any optional information such as steady state transportation improvement plan, CHIP, that's capital highway improvement plan, and scenic areas. So technically, we can add any additional geospatial data set that DOT think it's relevant and important to consider. So through this analysis, first, our tool can identify the suitable areas for placing overhead and buried electric transmission lines in right-of-ways. And based on the suitability analysis results, the tool computes the optimal path from origin and to destination point in most suitable right-of-way. And I will show you the examples of the maps in a second. And our tool also provides room to adjust the optimal path within a highly suitable zone. And using digital surface model, the tool helps us assess how much vegetation we may need to clear as well. And lastly, our tool provides rough order of magnitude estimates for construction cost. Next, please. Thank you. So I will start with the overhead transmission analysis that we conducted for Highway 14 from Mankato to Byron in Minnesota. So as you can see, on your left side of the map, that's the Highway 14, and you can see the two red flags that's from Mankato and Byron. And on the right side, the yellow polygon represent the right-of-way boundary GIS data sets. So the first analysis, next please. The first analysis step is identifying suitable areas based on the criteria. And as I mentioned before, we consider railroad water features, urban areas, bedrocks, and highway crossing, and any additional layers. And this is the results of suitability analysis on Highway 14. And we use green to red color scheme. Green means it's more suitable, less challenging spots within right-of-ways. Yellow means it's average okay, and red means it's less suitable, more challenging when we consider right-of-way transmission line. And you can see some of the example that I marked. You can see that the specific areas of right-of-way are red. That means water. There's a stream, river line pass by, and also railroad pass by. So those kind of highly weighted information flag that specific area that shows red compared to other spots of right-of-way. And on your right side, the entire area is very adjacent to municipal airports. That's why you can see almost entire right-of-way are red. Next, please. So using the suitability analysis results, we calculate the optimal path between origin and destination. And our tool finds the most suitable route based on the first suitability analysis results. And you can see the optimal path, which is white line, that only follows the greener parts of right-of-way. So it avoids red, yellow, and it only follows more green parts of the right-of-way. Next, please. Our tool also offers some option that you can move around the optimal path. So this is more like a generalized visualization of green to red suitability analysis results. So light beige area represent more highly suitable zone, while dark beige area, dark brown area represent less suitable areas. So this information can be particularly useful when there's specific spots you need to avoid due to various reasons, such as road construction, plan, or scenic areas. So using this information, you can move the optimal path within still highly suitable zone. Next, please. We also deliver vegetation and operation clearance zone. Since it is overhead, we provide the operation clearance zone as well. So these zones are required for public safety, reliable power delivery, and maintenance. Depending on the voltage type, we apply different buffer distance from the optimal path. So we received this information from the transmission expert as well. So for example, for high voltage transmission line, which is above 345 kilovolt, we apply 37.5 feet buffer for vegetation clearance zone to make total 75 feet. And for operational clearance zone, we apply 87.5 feet buffer and make total 175 feet. But that number can be adjusted as well. Next, please. Do I have more time, or I can stop here because next one is underground. And it's very similar. We go through almost same process, and you can expect a very similar process and results, but different consideration because underground need different criteria.
Thank you so much, Jesse. I think we would like to go to questions,
Sure.
although, and I do want to flag for folks that these slides are all going to be available online after this, as well as a recording of this webinar. And so you can dig in to them, and it is really interesting stuff. The first time I saw this demonstration, I was fascinated, and I'm still fascinated. So I do have a question. I'm not sure, Jesse, if it's for you or for Allie, but as you've been working with different states across the country, do you have any observations about what has been different from state to state?
Yeah, I'll take this question. I mean, each state has different considerations based on geography. So, for example, in the Western United States, particularly a state like Utah and Utah DOT, their rights of ways might be constrained in canyon areas. We see geographic realities and the constraints of the right of way also in the New England area where the development is more dense. So certainly there are geographic realities that create differences with state DOTs. There are also special considerations for our friends in northern states like Minnesota, where you want to be incorporating data layers related to living snow fences and snow fencing. And also your concerns around grounding might become a little bit more complex in those areas because of winter weather realities. And then the obvious answer to this, Deborah, is, where are transmission pressures and the pressure to develop transmission and an accelerated timescale? Where are those pressures the most intense? And you can imagine where you have, for example, data center aggregation, where you have states with large swaths of rural areas that make transmission development difficult to site with traditional aggregation of private lands. And so all of those things kind of level up into the considerations and the concerns. And on the other side of the coin, the opportunities to do this work with state departments of transportation. I think across the board, we've tried to develop, configure, and specialize this tool to be flexible in ingesting data sets at the request and the prioritization of each state DOT. So every state DOT is interested in their transportation planning assets being incorporated so that we tell state DOTs, we can see as far into the future as you can when we're able to ingest those transportation plans that may go out, 20 years or more. And I think we're really trying to future-proof the analysis outputs and the intelligence of the tool by being able to ingest those transportation plans and then be flexible to the special concerns and priorities of each state DOT.
Sure. Oh, thank you, Allie. It brings to mind some of the things Rebecca shared about how different those planning processes are. I want to remind everyone that you do have a question and answer option tool in Zoom. And if you have questions for our panelists, please use the Q&A box. However, if you do not have questions, we all agreed we were going to ask each other questions. And so Rebecca, take it away.
Thank you. One curiosity I have, and maybe this is a combination of Allie and Jessica and Jesse here, is how what Allie was just talking about how do we take what we know about transportation development and their own incentives and start to fold it into how we start to plan the electric sector piece. So I'm curious if, Jessica, you have thoughts about models for ways that the electric sector has stimulated transportation value from investment in the right of way. And then also, there's new transmission planning paradigms that are actively asking the states, what are your policy goals? And it is possible for transmission planning to try to look at existing utility corridors or other types of right of way as part of a planning process, but they have to sort of be asked to do that. MISO did that in the last round and sort of intentionally looked at utility corridors, but not right of ways more broadly. And so I guess I'm wondering whether the transportation sector has actually been brought into some of our electricity sector planning and how that's been for you to engage.
I don't think that we're fully there, Rebecca. I think that it's so much of our regular relationships and interactions is sort of traditionally been statutorily mandated by that downstream permitting actions of state agencies where there are going to be impacts that our public utility permitting process requires formal consultation and analysis of potential impacts and those elements. And it just feels so late and so far downstream. And then beyond just the PUC's permitting process, then we issue our own permits for projects. And I think that the key to all of this is how do we get so much further upstream? And I don't think we're yet resourced to fully do that. And I think tools like this help us do that where, would it make sense to pre-analyze corridors for the state? What would it take to do that? What would it take to just get so much further, even beyond that early coordination window, which as an agency to create more certainty for those that have projects that are going to be submitting a permit application for transmission lines, like that early coordination piece is so key to uncovering possible issues and saying, is this permittable? Because I think that we want to be that partner to help do that. And we need more certainty of pole placement and things. So where certain public service commissions and public utility commissions have processes that are so different. Some what the actual alignment versus large swaths get decided at different parts of the process, and that creates pressure points. So I think the earlier in the process and earlier upstream that we can get to say in X corridor, there's a project coming in 10 years. And so that would be a poor project because there could be interactions there. There's 3 new interchange in the wish list for X segment. This segment of highway might be turned back. I think there's so many different further we get upstream, the better we'll be. And I think that we're not yet aligned even in that not even early coordination, early kind of pre-analysis of corridors and things. So I think we have a long way to go. But I look to the wonderful examples of the joint Office of Transportation and Energy that was collaborated at the federal level, having those folks get at the same table. It makes a huge difference as we see our futures and fates as intertwined, and we are motivated to help solve problems jointly.
Thank you for that, Jessica. I think we have about 30 seconds left. I was wondering if Jesse Hung Dwyer could answer quickly, how long does it take to ingest a DOT's GIS layers? Like, is that a 1-week process, a 6-week process? How
Just
has that varied?
collecting data sets.
Yeah, like when you've gone in to work with a new DOT, how long is that process so far? Just rough, edges. As a former GIS person, dive in there.
So as Ellie mentioned, we do have we host our own nationwide right-of-way data, which was very challenging to secure,
Mhm.
almost impossible, except Minnesota and a couple other states, they develop their own. So now we don't need to worry about right-of-way, but other data set, we willing to use state-owned, most recent, up-to-date data set if possible. But other than that, we can use nationally available federal level data set, which will give us still good information, valuable information. But if possible, we rather want to. So depending on state,
Sure.
yeah. So it can take a couple days, or we'll just use nationally available S3 data set.
Thank you. Thank you. I was just curious. All right. So I want to thank all of our panelists. We're doing a virtual round of applause here because this was so informative and so helpful. Again, thank you so much. I'm afraid we don't have time for more questions, but if you want to pop one into the Q&A, it may be possible for panelists to answer it. But anyhow, I think we're going to close out. Thank you to everyone who is here, and I hope you all have a lovely afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Thank you.